Hello and welcome to Cosmos FM. I'm Dr. Despina Afentouli. On the occasion of the New York Mediterranean Business Summit that was organized by economists on May 31st, 2022, we have a special guest on our program, the American Jewish Committee Chief Executive Officer, David Harris. Dear Mr. Harris, welcome to our show and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with us about issues that matter both for the Greek and the Jewish people.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Mr. Harris, how do you assess the importance of the Economist Summit that you recently participated in? And to what extent do you feel that this kind of initiatives offer an added value to foster cooperations between countries or advocacy organizations such as the American Jewish Committee?
I think the conference itself is a reflection of the remarkable growth and development and expansion of relations, principally among Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. This kind of conference would have been almost unimaginable 30, 40 years ago, even 20 years ago, possibly. But today it seems so obvious and so natural. The atmosphere is friendly, it's positive, and people understand that the potential is still enormous. With all the progress that has been made, and there's a lot of progress in this triangle, there's much more that can be done, and this conference reflects that potential.
Mr. Harris, what was the main message of your speech at the Economist Summit?
Well, the first message was, as someone who was focused on this issue of the strategic triangle, Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, 40 years ago, when I became involved in trying to help imagine the triangle, it was almost impossible. Everyone was skeptical, cynical, negative. Israel was much more focused on Turkey than it was on Greece and Cyprus. Greece was hostile to Israel. It became a destination of Yasser Arafat and the PLO after they were forced to leave Lebanon. The regime of Andreas Papandreou was quite sympathetic to Moscow in the Cold War and quite sympathetic to radical Arab regimes. And Cyprus saw itself as a leader of the non-aligned movement. And both Cyprus and Greece had very chilly relations with Israel. So my main message to the people in the room was, never stop believing. History is not linear. History could be disrupted. History can move in many directions. In this case, an extraordinarily positive direction. So that was the first and most important message. And the second message was and is, we have this triangle. And we now have increased U.S. involvement that makes it a 3+1, maybe even one can call it a quadrilateral at times. But we have additional concentric circles. We now have the Eastern Med Gas Forum, which is headquartered in Egypt and includes the Egyptians, the Jordanians, and the Palestinians, as well as the French and the Italians, plus Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. Then we have the concentric circle of the countries of the Abraham Accords, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco in particular. So my main sort of focus looking forward, because I don't want to spend my life now looking in the rearview mirror, but looking forward, how do we take advantage of these growing concentric circles to develop further relationships, deepen the prospects of peace and cooperation? What can we learn from the founding of the European Union, which was built around coal and steel, but was actually driven by a desire to create peace and prevent war in the region? What can we apply in the Middle East and North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean? So let's keep looking forward and let's keep dreaming and let's keep finding people prepared not just to dream, but to build, to actualize the dreams as we have seen from 40 years ago until today.
According to your opinion, how can political leaders inspire good neighbor policy and preserve solidarity with other countries in promoting the power of peace instead of the power of war?
Well, today we have a very painful and sobering reminder of what the absence of peace means. And I'm referring to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. over 3 months ago, Russia violated every international norm, reminded the world that history in a way had not ended, that what seemed unimaginable has become imaginable, and look at the consequences. Millions of refugees forced to flee Ukraine, major parts of significant cities damaged and destroyed, accusations of war crimes and genocide. That's the alternative to peace. So political leaders who sometimes may focus excessively on day-to-day, on looking at poll numbers, on the next election or the next news cycle, need to step back and say, wait a second, we're now being offered an alternative direction of history, and it's being provided by Moscow. Is this the way we want the world to go? Haven't we had enough of that? We had enough of that in the Middle East. The Greek people historically have been affected by that kind of aggression. The Jewish people have been affected by that kind of aggression. Can't we create an alternative model? And that requires political leadership, not political followership, political leadership. And political leadership, in my book, means having a vision, having the courage to advocate for that vision, and having the ability to communicate that vision to others to join you in the effort. It's possible. And I would argue after February 24th, it's all the more necessary.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, and I'm quoting, no longer exists for him, after the Prime Minister of Greece urged a joint session of the US Congress not to drop a ban on Turkey's membership of a purchasing program for the next generation F-35 fighter jet. Taking into consideration that Turkey disputes Greece's sovereignty over its East Aegean islands, and Cyprus is experiencing the consequences of the Turkish invasion since 1974, how do you think that the global political community should deal with countries that their political leaders disrupt dialogue and consensus building based on the main principles of the international law?
So we at the American Jewish Committee have been very clear for a number of years. We want to be friends of Turkey. We understand Turkey's importance in the region, its size, its location, its many sources of strength. But, and it's a very big but, in our judgment, Turkey cannot be allowed to have it both ways. On the one hand, taking advantage of its membership in NATO or its bilateral relationship with the United States, and on the other hand, as you said in your question, violating so many international norms. And Turkey has believed, and unfortunately with some good reason, that it can have it both ways. That it can, on the one hand, continue to occupy up to 40% of Cypriot territory, continue to violate the exclusive economic zones of Cyprus, continue to overfly Greek airspace provocatively, aggressively, that it can continue to make these kinds of frankly ridiculous statements about Greece and its prime minister. And for that matter, I would add, as a Jew and a friend of Israel, that Turkey could behave as disruptively, as dangerously, as aggressively toward Israel, including, for years, housing the leadership of Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization listed by the European Union and the United States. But Turkey believed, Mr. Erdogan in particular, that it was strong enough and valuable enough to the international community that it could do these things on the one hand, and at the same time be at every significant decision-making table. And I believe, and have for a long time, that the international community needs to find its spine and stiffen its spine and look Mr. Erdogan clearly in the eye and say, if you want to continue to be a responsible partner for the European Union, for the United States, for NATO, then behavior has to change. And there were those who worry that Turkey may be driven away from NATO, for example, and move to the east. I think that's an unfounded concern. If Turkey were ever, for example, to walk out on NATO, who would be most hurt by that decision? It would be Turkey. It would lose an incredible amount of power and leverage that it now has. So I think that we should not allow ourselves to be bullied or intimidated by Mr. Erdogan. I think we have strong cards to play. We should make the rules clear. We want Turkey. Greece wants Turkey. Israel wants Turkey. Cyprus wants Turkey to be a responsible, moderating, peaceful neighbor and partner. But if the current behavior continues, that's not what Turkey will be.
You mentioned before about the dialogue that it should not be taken for granted between the countries that we now have today. And I'd like to ask you, what are the biggest achievements so far of the Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act and the U.S.-Greece Defense and Interparliamentary Partnership Act that followed?
Look, I would say, certainly in my 40 years of dealing with these issues, the bilateral relationship between Athens and Washington has never, I repeat, has never been stronger. And it's getting even stronger. That's number one. It's a huge achievement. Number two, the bilateral relationship between the United States and Cyprus is moving in a very positive direction. And one can see next steps in that bilateral relationship, which increasingly focus on sensitive issues, regional issues. So I think that's going very much in the right direction. And then you put together Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, and you look at the different spheres of cooperation, from people to tourism to culture to economy to high tech to innovation to intelligence sharing to joint military exercises. When we had the Economist Conference on May 31st, on that very day, there were Israeli Special Operations units from the IDF who were involved in joint exercises with their Cypriot counterparts on Cyprus. And that's only the latest example of both bilateral and trilateral initiatives, and in some cases, not just trilateral, but bringing in military forces from other countries that I've named earlier in this interview. So I think this is all extremely important, and I think the United States is once again very much focused on the Eastern Med. It could be difficult. The United States is being challenged on many fronts now, in Asia, in Ukraine, and elsewhere. But I think there's a deepening understanding of how important the Eastern Med is for strategic, energy, diplomatic, and economic reasons. And I think that's all to the good. And this to me is very important, I don't recall a time when there was more support for Greece, for Cyprus, for the triangle with Israel in the U.S. Congress, than there is today. The U.S. Congress is extremely on board and at the same time is deeply concerned about Turkish behavior and has big questions about a country that buys advanced Russian weapon systems as a member of NATO. Should it have access to advanced American weapon systems or should it not? Should a President Erdogan be allowed to come to Washington with his bodyguards who use the opportunity to attack peaceful demonstrators in Washington and to believe they can do so with impunity? The U.S. Congress was appalled by what they saw. So this is a moment when, if you will, the stock, so to speak, of the Eastern Med region, of Cyprus and Greece in particular, and of their partnership with Israel, I think is at an all-time high in the administration and on both sides of the aisle in Congress, and I would add in American public opinion.
And what's your biggest concern about the impact of Russia and Ukraine war on the stability of the Mediterranean region?
If Russia is not contained in Ukraine and Russia gets away with its aggression, its reckless, illegal, barbaric aggression, and if it's allowed to create a new status quo, which, by the way, it already began, of course, in 2014 with Crimea and Donbass, and now extends it, if it can get away with it, on the one hand, and if on the second hand, the unity of the international community against Russia begins to break down. And some people want to return to a kind of business as usual approach to Russia. What's the message for other potential aggressors, whether in Asia or in the Eastern Med? The message is, you can do this. You can violate international norms. You can break international law. You can engage in aggressive behavior. And guess what? You can get away with it. And the punishment, if there is punishment, will be brief. And before you know it, it will be a return to business as usual. So I think not just for the sake of Ukraine, though we are longtime friends of Ukraine and its sovereignty and territorial integrity, but for the sake of the international order, of international norms, including in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Eastern Med, all the potential aggressors need to learn the right lessons, and not the wrong lessons. If they learn the wrong lessons, we're headed for a period of much greater global crisis, aggression, and I dare say chaos.
How do you assess a potential or closer cooperation of Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, along with Arab, Balkan, and North African countries?
As I said, I see a series of concentric circles. What's fundamental to Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, and this needs to be remembered, is it's not just a triangle of interests, of neighbors. It's also a triangle of values. At their core, these countries are not just joined together because they're potential tourist destinations, though they are, and because there are energy interests, though there are, of course, and because they're geographically close, though they are. These are three countries that have fundamental shared values. All three today are thriving democracies. All three protect fundamental basic rights, freedom of worship, freedom of speech, freedom of the media, pluralism. These are values. So I believe that these three form a very distinctive group. And then as you move out to other concentric circles, they may be less driven by values today, but they are certainly driven by important interests. And those interests need to be further developed. But again, it's like the European Union. At its founding, in 1950-51, the 6 countries at the founding of the European Union gathered together around coal and steel. Those were the initial driving forces. But that was not really the heart of the founding of the European Union. Was 6 countries that were linked together to try and prevent future war. That was the goal of the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman and his deputy Jean Monnet when they were tasked with the challenge of finding a post-war formula to prevent future war on the European continent. And they came up, I think, with 2 basic drivers. One was create economic interdependence. So in this case, first coal and steel, and then the European Atomic Energy Agency, Euratom. And the second was to ensure that the countries in the group had certain shared values. And one of them was democracy. This was the Federal Republic of Germany, founded in 1949, built on democratic principles, joined together with France, with Italy, with Belgium, with Netherlands, and Luxembourg. And fast forward to the European Union today, 27 member states. It's not just about integrating economies or integrating energy policies or electrical grids or standardizing light bulbs or determining which countries have the right to the names of which cheeses, mozzarella or feta or camembert. At its heart, these are 27 democracies, liberal democracies, perhaps with only 1 or 2 exceptions temporarily. Liberal democracies that are tied together by values, joined by interests. Greece, Israel, and Cyprus are joined together by both values and interests. And they need to expand those networks, hopefully one day based on shared values, but in the meantime, identifying shared interests
And how do Jewish people perceive this trilateral cooperation of Greece, Cyprus, and Israel for regional stability and the 3+1 scheme for the United States?
I think to the extent that I could observe, I don't think there have been any polls that I know of, but I think this is very much admired and respected among those who know. And part of the work for us in the American Jewish Committee is to help more people understand what's going on among Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. And I will add, it's not just driven by diplomacy and politics and security and trade and investment and energy. The Hellenic people and the Jewish people, when they meet each other, when they spend time together, when they visit each other's countries, when they eat each other's foods, when they listen to each other's music, when they simply sort of observe each other, my goodness, I don't know of two peoples that have more in common than the Hellenic and Jewish people. I've spent a lot of time over many years in Greece, Cyprus, and of course Israel. And it's astonishing to me of how comfortable all of us feel in each other's cultures and societies. It's like not just going to a new place, in a way it's going home, and then it's coming back home. And I just see this again and again. And so I think the potential is enormous for additional joint tourism, for additional joint cultural exchange programs, for deepening people-to-people relationships. So it's not just at the government-to-government level. That's obviously important. But what we have here is the potential to further deepen and widen the relationship among cultures, historical civilizations, peoples who share the Eastern Med, and who have a shared goal in establishing a region of peace and prosperity.
Some of the oldest Jewish communities in history are the Jews of Greece. And the Consulate of Greece in New York commemorates every year the Holocaust Remembrance Day. According to your opinion, to what extent has the world learned from the historical past and shows tolerance to diversity today?
I very much appreciate what the Greek Consulate in New York does every January in memory of the Holocaust, and in particular in memory of the tens of thousands of Greek Jewish victims of the Holocaust. And I've had the privilege of attending the ceremony for many years and speaking at the ceremony as well, thanks to Consul General Konstantinos Koutras, who invited me. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, for us at the American Jewish Committee, we try and avoid the use of the word tolerance. We don't think tolerance is a sufficiently high threshold for the way democratic and pluralistic societies should deal with one another. I don't want to be tolerated, and I in turn don't want to tolerate other people. I think the threshold should be higher. It should be that we learn mutual respect, mutual understanding, and build toward mutual friendship. And I think, again, this is very much the direction in which we're all going. But then you ask a very important question. How much has the world learned from history? And certainly what the Greek people have suffered over centuries and what the Jewish people have suffered over centuries should be case studies in what happens when human beings behave so aggressively, so irrationally. I fear sometimes that history in today's world is a turnoff, that lots of people don't want to be bothered by history. They don't want to learn from history. They think that life is lived only in the present and history is a distraction or a bore. But if we're not prepared to learn from history, if we're not prepared to learn that in the case of the Jewish people, what began with words against Jews, anti-Semitic words, led within years to Auschwitz and to Birkenau and to Treblinka and to Mauthausen and the other death camps, and ultimately led to the genocide of 6 million Jews, 1/3 of the Jewish people, including 1.5 million Jewish children, babies, toddlers, teenagers. If we can't learn from man's capacity for inhumanity, we're doomed. And that's why I say that we have to learn from the Greek experience. We have to learn from the genocide against the Greeks and the Assyrians. We have to learn from the Jewish experience. We have to learn from what we're now seeing before our eyes in Russia's war crimes against Ukrainians. We have to learn. And for that, we need the courage of political leaders. We need the courage of religious leaders. We need the courage of civic leaders to stand up and to show leadership now more than ever.
Thank you so much. And I suppose this is the message to the audience of Cosmos FM as well.
Absolutely. Efharisto Poli, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Harris, for this interesting discussion.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dr. Despina Afentouli, and you've just heard our discussion with the American Jewish Committee Chief Executive Officer, David Harris. Thank you for listening to Cosmos FM. Until next time, Yasas.